Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started since we're already a few minutes over past 4. But everyone for joining us today. Really appreciate all of you spending some time with us on this summer afternoon. Today is the first session of the 2021 Greenbelt Home Tour, and my name is Ashley Marinko, and I'm the Program Associate at Illinois Green Alliance. We have a really special presentation today that I'm really excited to learn more about. But before we jump into that, I'm going to go over a few logistics and share some information about Illinois Green Alliance. Everyone has been muted upon entry, so we cannot see or hear any of you guys as attendees or participants. So if you have a question, please type it into the Q&A or into the chat, and we will have 30 minutes at the end of the presentation to get those questions answered. So be sure to type all your questions that you have into the Q&A because there'll be plenty of time. And any questions we don't get to, I can send to our panelists to respond to and send in a follow-up email. So be sure to ask anything that you've been wanting to know or that comes up, as well as I'm going to be recording this program, so I'll be sending that recording in a follow-up email, hopefully by Friday or sometime next week. And so you'll be receiving this recording and some resources as well. Lastly, if anybody's having any issues seeing me right now or seeing our speakers, if you logged into Eventbrite and logged in through Zoom on Eventbrite, I suggest you log in through Zoom directly, which the link will be sent in the chat if that's the case. A little bit about Illinois Green Alliance. We are a membership-driven nonprofit organization that advances green buildings and sustainable communities for all. Our recently launched 5-year strategic plan pushes the green building industry to meet or get on the path to net zero. And we achieve this through educational events such as this, engaging communities and partnering with organizations across Illinois and advocating for new policies and legislation. Members can view our past recorded webinars on our on-demand library. So I definitely suggest checking that out to see all of our webinars from 2020 and 2021. Part of our work to make net zero buildings feasible includes bringing these practices to residential homes through the Greenbelt Home Tour, which began in 2013 by a group of passionate volunteers who were passionate about green homes and increasing the demand for high performance homes throughout Illinois. Previously, we had weekend tours that we would have throughout the summer and Q&As with homeowners and builders. We have online resources and all different kinds of things to help make green homes accessible and help attendees see the benefits of having a green home. This year and last year, we changed the format of the Greenbelt Home Tour to be virtual to keep everyone safe and not have people walking through other people's homes. So thank you everyone who joined us last year and again this year for adapting with us to a virtual setting. And following today's webinar, we will have a series of webinars for the Greenbelt Home Tour, which will be, our next one will be on August 11th, then August 25th, then September 8th and September 15th. The Greenbelt Home Tour could not be possible without our sponsors, so I would like to thank our sponsors, the Chicago Association of Realtors, Mitsubishi Electric, and ComEd. Thank you so much for making the Greenbelt Home Tour possible. And I would also like to thank our marketing partners for helping us spread the word about the home tour and green homes. So thank you to ISIF, AIA Illinois, the Southwest Suburban Home Builders Association, 7 Generations Ahead, Green Home Institute, and the Midwest Energy Alliance, Efficiency Alliance. And then finally, I'd just like to thank our task force, which was a group of volunteers who helped us, who worked with the staff to help us come up with the virtual Greenbelt Home Tour this year and focus in more on net zero, as well as how to show different types of projects to make green building and green homes more accessible to everybody and all attendees. So I'd like to thank our volunteers who spent so much time meeting with us to plan that. Next, I would like to turn it over to our sponsor at Mitsubishi Electric.
Thank you, Ashley, and thank you everybody for joining today. My name is Mike Schaefer, and I'm the Senior Manager of Performance Construction here at Mitsubishi Electric Heating and Air Conditioning. And we are a sponsor, again, for the Greenbelt Home Tour this year. I feel like I just did this virtual introduction, but that was a year ago that we did this. Time flies during a pandemic, I guess, in some form or fashion. But we are the manufacturer of residential as well as light commercial, but we'll kind of talk just for the next couple of minutes about residential cooling and heating zone comfort solutions for all your homes, specifically high performance homes in general, of what we'll be hearing about on this year's tour as usual. Something that sets us apart from most other HVAC systems that you may be used to is we're all electric air source heat pumps. So the biggest difference is we're not utilizing gas for heating. We're actually transferring the heat via an air source heat pump during the winter from outside inside to condition your space, and vice versa with cooling. We're not only focused just on the HVAC equipment to take care of the heating and cooling, we look at everything from a very holistic approach, and as a company are extremely dedicated to energy efficiency, sustainability, and healthy communities and homes. We've been a sponsor on the tour. I have 5 years, it might be 6. My memory goes a little bit, but at least the last 5 years, but this might be year 6 that we've been a sponsor for the Greenbelt Home Tour. And I really, really love being a part of this group and being on the task force and being able to help, even with this virtual tour, being able to put together some amazing homes that we're going to see over the next coming weeks. A little bit oh, sorry, next slide, Ashley. I went to advance the slides and I forgot that I don't have control. Just wanted to take a second and talk about the residential product lineup that we actually have. So I don't know if you can hear it. Hopefully you can hear it, but I'm coming from a hotel room in Minneapolis right now. I'm local to Chicago, but I'm up in Minnesota this week. And I have a very loud, noisy, uncomfortable, inefficient hotel PTAC unit. That is not what we are, right? We are not this noisy hotel PTAC unit in the back, which sometimes we get thought of that way. Reason being is when someone says Mitsubishi Electric equipment, we think of the equipment we see in the middle of the screen, ductless high wall units that generally go high on the wall. That's not a hotel PTAC unit. It's the converse opposite of that. It's extremely quiet, extremely energy efficient, but we're not just ductless wall mount units. We have other ductless options. And when I say ductless, that means providing heating and cooling into your space without the need for ductwork to move that air throughout for air distribution. So we have ductless wall mount, floor mount. We have units that recess directly into a ceiling to get them off the wall. We also have very traditional style ducted units, whether that's a full ducted air handler or horizontal style ducted air handlers if you want to handle multiple spaces or larger areas, or just want to not have ductless equipment to heat and cool as well. So we have a very large selection of indoor unit fan coil designs. We have single zone systems for one room or one zone. We have multi-zone for a whole home application. Just a lot of equipment and a lot of solutions to heat and cool your space comfortably and efficiently. I'll take the last slide. For more information about our products, or if you'd like to find a contractor in your area, you can visit our website at mitsubishicomfort.com. There's actually a dealer locator on the site, so you can input your zip code and find certified Mitsubishi Electric contractors that can take care of your home or your business. My contact information is listed below as well. Like I said, I am local to Chicago. I just happen to be in Minnesota this week. But if you have any questions related to a new construction or retrofit or renovation project, feel free to reach out to me. My phone number and my email is listed there, and I'd be happy to help you with any of your upcoming projects. I'm actually by the hotel by the Minneapolis airport, so you might have just heard the direct line of airplanes I have going over me right now. Thank you very much for allowing me to be a sponsor and speak briefly on this year's home tour again. I'm now going to pass it over to the project team for the Frank Lloyd Wright House, and looking forward to this great presentation.
All right. Thanks very much, Mike and Mitsubishi for helping out with this tour. It's been the greatest way for us as in our architecture firm, and I know for other builders and architects to reach people about what we're doing with green building. So I'm Tom Bassett-Dilley, architect and passive house consultant, and I want to introduce or have the team introduce themselves here. It's such an exciting project, and I'm glad we can share this with everybody. There we are. Hi, Doug. So I'll start with myself, and then I'm going to hand it to Samantha, who's the owner. But I just want to say that, so I've been on the Greenbelt home tour since it started in 2013. We've had a fortune to really pursue this passion for energy efficient, healthy, low energy homes, and so it's been a great ride. But what's interesting to me about this year is that, as I like to tell people, when I got involved, when I got excited about architecture in high school, it was because of a book on Frank Lloyd Wright. And I saw his work as a high school student who liked drafting, and went, wow, I didn't know anything could be so beautiful. So I just went crazy, bought everything or got everything from the library I could on Frank Lloyd Wright. And also interesting, at the bookstore, since it was 1977, what had just been published was the Passive Solar Energy book. And so in my sort of formative years in architecture, I was looking at the beauty of architecture from Frank Lloyd Wright, which is nature-based, nature-inspired, very humanist kind of approach. And at the same time, Ed Mesria's Passive Solar Energy book and the energy efficiency that was coming out of the oil embargo years. So anyway, long story short, I started my firm 15 years ago with this motivation just intrinsic in me. And then here comes Samantha Lottie saying, I have a Frank Lloyd Wright house. Can you help make it net zero? I was like, oh my God, I just came full circle there. So this is really a great thing for me personally. I'm here with Denny Burke, who's a senior project manager, my senior project manager, and the manager of this project as well. So whenever I'm going to fumble over details, he'll be able to say, no, Tom, actually, this is what we're doing. So anyway, we're all going to introduce ourselves, and we'll jump into the slides. So Samantha, you want to take it away and tell us why we're here in the first place?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. That was a great introduction to your involvement, and how I got here to begin with. Pursuing this project started with the question of why using or pursuing alternative energy sources or energy efficiency in homes in the United States was seen as a lesser option or difficult or, not worth the time, not worth the money, not worth the attention. So because I'm in a privileged position of being a steward of a Frank Lloyd Wright home for the time being, obviously, specifically the Balch House, which you will see, I felt like the project would be in alignment with both the philosophy and work of Frank Lloyd Wright, who reflected deeply on the relationship between architecture and nature. And he was known for, whenever there was a new building material that came available, he would absolutely try it and pursue it. So in my philosophical conversations with Tom and with the team, I became really interested in this idea of the evolution of architecture over time, and how an old architectural home like this one that's from 1911 could with time become up to date without letting go of the privilege or the comforts of modern life, while pursuing what the evolution of architecture has done over time, which is come up with better energy sources, come up with better insulation, come up with better opportunities and living environments, etc. So this project for me puts together an important conversation about energy resources in our modern time and in our with the available energy resources at this moment, and how to allow historic architecture to evolve with those changes, technological changes. So I feel, as I said, very privileged to be in this position and have the resources to do this and have the team that I have. So having Tom, Mark, Doug helping me actually bring this into fruition. So I'll pass this on to Doug, since he's, oh, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. Either is great. Take it away, Doug. Tell us. So Doug Freerksen, Dreele-Freerksen Construction Company.
That's me. Well, first, Samantha, thank you so much for including me in this this great team. And it is a privilege to to work not only on, I think, my 33rd Frank Lloyd Wright structure, but I've lost count really, but also one with this approach. This is a really unique approach, one that I'm really delighted to be involved in. My company is, I don't know, 34 years and change old. I'm one of the founding partners. Couldn't be happier to be involved.
All right, and Mark.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, I'll echo my thanks to Samantha for including me on the team. When Tom brought the project to me as a suggestion, I was my eyes lit up and I was extraordinarily excited because it combines the two things that we do in our firm. We try to do the most, which is preserve and restore historic structures, and then includes sustainable systems designs whenever we can. We've been very fortunate. We work in Oak Park, and there's, of course, a vast assortment of historic structures here, and we've been able to work on a whole pile of them over the years, the 27 years or so that we've been in business. So it's been a real pleasure, and this project has had its unique challenges, as I'm sure we'll see as the presentation goes forward. But it's been a lot of fun, and that's the reason I like working on the old buildings is everyone's different, everyone's unique, and everyone's a unique challenge. So it's very exciting to be part of this group and trying to make this happen.
And if I could toot your horn just a little more, Mark, you came onto this project at the tail end of having helped design the retrofit geothermal system for Unity Temple.
I did.
And so you've had your hands busy with Frank Lloyd Wright. And we knew Mark for years because he's kind of seen as an expert in geothermal, or to use a correct term, ground source heat pumps. And that is part of the solution here on this project. So I'm going to share my screen and we can jump into this. If I can just do this. Go. Okay. So let me just change the view of this and put this in slideshow format. Great. All right. And hopefully it's not going to start auto advancing on me. That's always embarrassing. So we're showing you a rendering instead of the photograph because currently the house has the colors it has now, which we discovered are not the original colors. And we'll talk about that as we get into this. So just to kind of frame this whole thing, here's a fantastic piece of architecture from 1911, as Samantha said. And when she came to me and said, can you help me make this net zero? I was like, oh, wow. And, frankly, I was really kind of scared because we don't want to mess it up. That's, I guess, the kind of the base level of preservation is like, don't mess it up. But by bringing in Doug, who's done Doug's company, a lot of work on these houses, he knows how to find out what was there and kind of be this sort of sleuth, this detective of the physical material, so that when we get done and it gets put back, you walk into Von Dreele-Freerksen projects and you can't tell where the old and the new, it's seamless. And so that's what we're after here. But we're taking a gigantic energy consumption and shrinking it down by a huge amount. And so net zero, let's just define the term, is the idea that we will make as much energy using on-site renewables, in this case, solar PV. We'll make as much energy in the course of a year as we use. And we are all electric on the house. There will be no gas at the end of this. So we can offset all the energy, with solar PV. So that's the goal here. We started with existing documentation that we could get from the previous owners, and it was kind of out there in the world. And it's always wonderful to look at the old drawings and see what Frank Lloyd Wright was thinking about, what was drawn. And the house, as you can see, is quite a long house stretched facing the east and west. So the south that we normally like to stretch to is the short side of the house. And what you're not seeing in this is on that floor plan, the upper right, there's a family room addition that was added in the 2000s. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Doug. But as we look through the detailed drawings, we can see there's no insulation. You can see that overhang detail on the right-hand drawing. The top left corner of the right-hand drawing is the roof overhang. There's basically a thermal bridge and an airtightness problem drawn into the working drawings. And so, these were not that uncommon. They didn't have a way to really, they didn't have capillary breaks. They didn't have, dense packed cellulose insulation or spray foam, et cetera. So this is what we're inheriting. And we have to think about how we're going to handle that and handle it in a way that the building will be left better when we're done, not worse. So when we look at historic preservation, the kind of backbone to that, or the starting point, is the Secretary of the Interior Standards for Rehabilitation. There's a screenshot here. They have an illustrated guideline. And the fundamental principles are keep all the original material. You can say, oh, I'll just throw that thing out and replace it with something that looks the same. We really want to keep the actual original material. And sometimes we can and sometimes we can't. But that's it. If you can't keep it, you need to replace it in kind. So if you're tearing off a plaster ceiling, replace it with a plaster ceiling. Don't replace it with 5/8 drywall and just paint it. The other principle is reversibility, so that if somebody comes in and says, I really want to turn this into a museum and have it be just what was originally here, then the things that we did should be able to be removed without damaging what was there. The interior and exterior purview, as actually should be a bullet point on the next thing, which is the tax assessment freeze. So we're pursuing a tax assessment freeze on this project, which means that the tax assessment level is going to be held at the pre-renovation value of the house for 10 years, and then it ramps up for 2 more years after that. If you spend at least 25% of the project's market value, which we're definitely doing. So those are sort of the preservation backgrounds. We always start renovation projects with as-built drawings, and so this was like the best as-built exercise to date. It was just so much fun as an architect to go in and just have a good look. I'm going to show you this model. If you can see it, if anybody can't see my SketchUp model, Ashley or somebody, if you want to let me know. We draw in Archicad, which is a building information modeling program. And since we can't walk through the house, I can give you a little bit of a walkthrough here and kind of let you see sort of the after that we're going to get to in a couple of years. You can see we're putting solar on the roof, and as you can see, it's completely not visible from the street. And so that's our renewable energy source. We'll talk more about that later. The front door is a back door on the Balch House. It's this door underneath the overhang here at the back. That's it. It's one of the classic kind of Wright experiences where he choreographs this experience where you have to come in through a mysterious passageway and enter behind the hearth or adjacent to the hearth, which is the heart of the home. It's the anchor, and it's going to be an experience getting there. Oops, I jumped a scene. Sorry. So here we are in this little compressed entryway, and then we come up into the house, and here we are. So this is the big space facing east, and it's a great room, and it's a connected sort of library at our back. Living room is the alcove off to the right, and in the front to the end is the dining room. Now, one of the things I want to point out, because it's going to become important as we talk about our strategy here for retrofit, is I'm just going to orbit around here. It's these radiators that you can see underneath this window, the grills underneath the patio doors, the big radiator here. Heating, and in our case, it's also going to be cooling, is integral to the architecture, okay? And this is something that Wright was, as Samantha said, phenomenally good at. And there's a book that I'm going to recommend later that talks about how he embraced technology and thought about it. And so obviously we have different technology now, but we want to honor his approach as much as we can. I'm going to go up through the floor into the primary bedroom suite. Here we are. This has a bank of windows to the east, which are wonderful for view, but Samantha can tell you what it was like during polar vortex with the bed under those windows. Well, how warm could you get the house that winter, Samantha? Was it like 50 something?
Yeah, it was 55 was the warmest I could get it during the polar vortex.
Yeah. So we're talking about trying to improve the quality of life here by this work we're doing. So anyway, there's a little tour, digital tour. We can come back to that if we need to. Yeah, so that's kind of our starting point, so that we can start to think about how we're going to attack this from an energy standpoint. And so Mark did an energy model specifically for his thermal demands, especially for sizing the geosystem. And we do one in the same program that we use to do our passive house certification, WFI Passive, which looks at everything. It looks at electrical, lighting, space cooling, space heating, air tightness, and it all puts it into a program and gives us our energy balance. So you can see here on the right, the energy balance is like, here's how much heating we need to offset what we're losing through walls, roof, windows, and ventilation in the winter. And in this case, ventilation is just a leaky house. And what you see here is what we see in all of the houses, the old houses that are not well insulated, which is that most of the energy is what you're seeing on the left-hand graph. Almost all of the energy is going to heating this building. So what are we going to do? Well, we want to insulate and make it airtight, and that'll make it more comfortable and make the heating system a lot smaller. We did start with the preliminary blower door. Joe Konopacki came out from Insight and found that we were about 10 air changes per hour when the building was pressurized to 50 pascals, which is a sort of building standard. Passive houses, we want that to be like 1 or below, so 10 times less leaky. And we know that we're not going to get to a passive house level here. We're shooting for 2. If we can get there, that'll be great. If we make it to 3, it's still going to be okay, but we definitely want to prioritize air tightness because it has a lot to do with durability. So after our retrofit, using our energy model, plugging in all the things we're doing in the basement, in the walls, and the windows, and the ceiling, this is what we're looking at. We cut the heating down by a factor of about 8 or 9 or 10, which is not uncommon. And that means we need a much smaller heating and cooling system. And we know that then if we look at how much we can produce in renewables, then we can offset that amount of energy and get to zero energy. Now, when we did our model, we were looking at being able to get 52 panels, PV panels on the roof at 330 watts per panel. Now that watt rating is changing. And if we can get 400 watt panels by the time we put them on in a year or so, we'll easily be at net zero. Right now, we're almost at net zero. We're at EUI, which is energy use intensity of 1. So EUI, a net zero building is EUI of 0. And so we're coming from 96 down to 1, which is a pretty good factor. But we want to go from 96 to 0. And we can get there either soon or in the future. Well, how do we get there? As I kind of alluded to, step 1 is conservation. Stop the waste. And that is so basic and simple. It's insulation and air sealing and making it as continuous and thorough as possible. So foundation, walls, roof, windows, we want to address it all. That's step 1. Step 2 then is once you've done that and you've eliminated a lot of your losses, you go to looking at efficient systems. So get an efficient mechanical system for heating and cooling and domestic hot water. Those are the biggies. And then get efficient with your appliances. Swap out your gas cooktop and dryer for electric units, induction cooktop and a heat pump condensing dryer. And then you've got your energy balance, your energy diet, and then you put on solar to offset it. So that's the steps. Sounds simple. How did we do it? So want to kind of walk through the retrofit assemblies, and when we get to the mechanical, we'll get Mark talking more about his the strategies here. So this is our foundation condition. It's a rubble wall foundation, big thick wall, and as I said, there are no capillary breaks in early 1900s construction. And what is a capillary break? Well, it's a thing that it's a film like you know, a waterproof membrane or a sheet of plastic that keeps the moisture from the earth from wicking into the building. We use those all the time now, vapor barriers underneath the slab, but back in 1911, they didn't have them. So what we've got is moisture coming up into the building, and we got to think about that in addition to the heat loss. So our plan for the basement is to take out the slab, get some EPS insulation underneath that slab. That's a white styrofoam. Get a vapor barrier on top of it and put a new slab down. And Denny pointed out, as we were looking at this, previewing it today, that we should be showing a little thermal break between that slab and the foundation wall. We don't want to touch warm slab to cold wall. So that will be going in. When we do that, we can put a new perimeter drain to the interior, take it to a sump, make sure that things remain dry. Moving up from the slab, we put a dimpled membrane against that kind of wavy wall. On a building where we're not being so concerned about historic, we might just spray foam that. If you look at Building Science Corporation, what Joe Seabrick did in his old house where he had rubble wall, he just sprayed it with spray foam. It acts as a capillary break and a thermal break, and it can sit over the wavy surface, not a problem. But that's not reversible so much. So we wanted to do something here that could be reversible. So we want to kind of put up the dimpled membrane so that any moisture that does come in can just go down to the perimeter drain, and then put mineral wool bats up against that. So mineral wool can kind of flex a little bit and take the irregularity. We're going to stand a stud wall in front of that, and we can drywall it. So the moisture will be kept out of the building, and we'll have a decent R value. We're cutting down the heat loss through the floor and the walls. So greater comfort as well, even though it's not really a finished basement. Now, when you get to the top of that wall, they just set the studs on the rubble wall. And so moisture that wicks into that, that foundation just wicks up into the old wood. Well, good news is the old wood was really tremendously good quality old growth lumber. And the other thing that was happening in this house over the years, over the 110 years, is that since it didn't have insulation, you're just pumping heat through the envelope to dry everything out. So this is the conundrum with retrofitting an old building, is that it's really a wonderful way to preserve a building by just not insulating it, just throwing heat at it, but we can't do that to the environment. So when we start to cool down the exterior surfaces by insulating them, we have to be careful not to let the moisture wreak havoc. So here, Doug came up with a really ingenious solution that we could remove the existing sill plate in portions, so we don't have to like jack up the whole building, and let that dimpled membrane come up and lap over the top of the wall. Well, we actually use a waterproof, a moisture-proof tape there as a capillary break, go underneath the sill plate, which would be a treated sill plate, and then just reconnect the studs to that. So that's our way of keeping the moisture out of the frame. So that's coming up down the road. We talked about spray foam here as a way of kind of sealing the rim joist area, which is always a little tricky, and the sort of top of wall. We may think about doing that. It may be the right thing to do. So we have yet to really lock that in, but right now that's not our plan. Okay, the above grade wall is basically 2x4s with plaster on the inside and stucco on the outside. Single glazed windows. I mean, this is as thin of a assembly you'll ever want to see in this climate. Well, you don't want to see that in this climate. Nowadays we do 2x6 full of insulation plus outboard insulation. So how do we address this? Well, we want to make it more airtight. We want to insulate it some. And this is where thinking about the preservation issues and kind of leveraging Doug's expertise really came in. We discovered in looking at some old pieces of plaster on the house that it actually had a kind of a golden finish, the original stucco. And then as we started digging on some of the trims, we found that there was this beautiful red color. So Samantha was all for it. She's like, yeah, great, let's go for it. And so we said, all right, we're going to recoat the stucco on the outside. So therefore, let's go ahead and take the opportunity to drill holes in the stud base so we can pump cellulose into the walls and we can get some insulation in there. And then when we patch them and recoat, you won't know that we messed with it. And that way we don't have to mess with all the interior, because the interior we weren't planning to mess with the plaster finish. So that gives us, you know, a modest R13, but it's a heck of a lot better than a really modest R0. So it'll slow down airflow. It'll give us an insulation. It'll help with acoustic control as well. So the other part of this, of course, is the windows. So when we got to the site, we could see, like in that master bedroom, so much condensation on the inside of those single glazed windows just comes down. It was ruining the sills. The sills were becoming destroyed by this moisture, which you couldn't keep out of the house. I mean, there's moisture inside the house. It's going to condense on cold glass, and it's going to wreak havoc on your interior finishes. So we knew we needed to get improvement in the windows. We looked at exterior storms, we looked at interior storms, and ultimately we settled on interior storms so that we could let the original art glass read from the outside. Yes, those windows will continue to weather, but we'll have to just keep improving or repairing them as we need to. So we worked with Adams Architectural Millwork. They're an Iowa company, and they make custom storms, and they're terrific. And then Doug's guys, Tom Wilder, the carpenter, just knocked it out of the park. I mean, this is on the right. On the left, you can see the storm window down in the living room closed, this is up in the, this is in the living room, closed and open. The exterior color matches the wood on the outside. The interior matches the woodwork of the inside. And then in the upper right, you're seeing, when it was in the shop before it was finished, this kind of black neoprene or silicone rather gasket that really helps us with the airtightness. So that, and then there wasn't a lot of rabbet, the R-A-B-B-E-T, the depth of jamb to receive hinge. So Doug and Tom had to think about mortising those in. But then that silicone gasket really helps us get the airtightness. Now, one thing that we've really been monitoring is condensation can still happen. And you know, there are certain environmental situations where the humidity is really high and where the dew point is kind of high, but it's cold outside. So Samantha, would you say that, like, you know, 2 or 3 times, it happens seasonally? I mean, we haven't had these on very often, but there's been a little bit, and it kind of goes away fast. There's not been as much as before.
So it's mostly at the change of the seasons, and it is mostly on the windows that get direct sunlight. So for example, the east windows in the master bedroom, they will have condensation when we're passing from, I guess it was winter to summer this time. Yeah, the spring is typically one of our most difficult seasons moisture-wise, So on balance, it's a heck of a lot less, and you can always crack the window open and release the condensation. You know, you're not going to get as much energy savings, but at least, you know, we have that option there. So that's the storms, and it made a difference with comfort, didn't it? It made a huge difference. I now can sleep up there just fine.
Yeah. So here's that roof detail that we were looking at earlier on the Frank Lloyd Wright drawings, put in our system. A lot of air tightness problems here. There's basically a 2x8 ceiling rafter, a flat rafter that can lever it out for these overhangs. And And so there's no air tightness there. There's no insulation. So the house has really extreme version of the stack effect, where stack effect is basically like chimney, the warm air rises. And so if you give it a place to get out at the top, it'll just rise and head on out. And then the whole house is up like a chimney. It's just turning over air constantly. And that's really tough on your interior finishes, because what you're doing is you're sucking in dry winter air and then you're heating it, which makes it even drier, and you just get parched on the inside. So usually the first thing you want to do is try to get a good lid on the building. In other words, you want to air seal and insulate the top, and then take care of the bottom so you don't have the intake. And then those are the farthest parts of the pressure plane, if you think of it that way: neutral pressure in the middle, and high and low pressure top and bottom. So that kind of stops the building acting like a chimney, and it contains the air on the inside, which you might be thinking, okay, boy, contained air sounds stale. And it can be stale, and that's why you need ventilation. So we have an energy recovery ventilation system that we'll be talking about here in a minute. Managing moisture, etc. So what do we do? Well, we really went round and round about this as a team. And what Samantha pointed out, as you can see here on the left, is that the ceilings on the second floor were in pretty bad shape. So we knew we had to do something to clean them up. And Doug kind of harvested some samples. You can see the photo in the middle and saw, hey, look, this is the finish, this kind of sand finish plaster that was originally there. We could recreate that if we take down these ceilings and replace them. We were thinking, are we going to insulate this roof from the top? In other words, drill holes in and somehow get the insulation in and avoid these interior finishes? Or are we going to take down these ceilings, insulate from the bottom, and then put the new ceilings back? And that's ultimately what we wound up doing. It was a significant amount of work, and we had to be very careful with dust and all that stuff. But it allows us to get the ductwork working. It just allowed us to solve all the problems, basically. So the photo on the right then is the ductwork going in. That was just like a couple of weeks ago, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, 2 weeks. Yeah, so that's the master vestibule. We'll get there in just a second. So here's the retrofit. So what we need to do as we control the air tightness and the thermal control up at the top of the house is we got to think about being safe with condensation. Now, we like to avoid spray foam from the standpoint that it's a high embodied energy product, and embodied energy is, super important to think about, but we need to air seal the top of this house. And as you can see in the photo on the lower right, there's a lot of complexity in the way this roof was kind of strutted up to be able to get this low pitch. Not quite enough pitch by today's standard. That's Frank Lloyd Wright for you. When I was at Taliesin, I spent a year at Taliesin, the Frank Lloyd Wright School of Architecture, and I remember once looking at a drawing of one of his Usonian houses from the 1950s, like the original. It was just so fun to see these drawings. And there was a note. It said, all roofs should be absolutely flat, dead level. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe they actually said that, because it's such a no-no, because eventually it's going to pond and you're going to leak, So anyway, so we need to control condensation. That means that we either need to get enough rigid insulation above the existing roof deck, or we need to spray foam on the underside of the roof deck with closed cell foam so that air can't get there and condense on the decking, or a combination of the two. And the combination of the two is what we did. We could put an inch of polyiso outside, and that's an R6 per inch. We get R6 out there, and then we spray enough insulation on the underside of the roof deck to control for condensation with our closed cell. Now, this is not really reversible, but it's worth it, I think. We decided as a team, because it's going to make the house, it's going to completely transform the function of this house and make it comfortable and low energy. So we get about, 5 inches of closed cell?
Yeah, that's what we're planning on.
And then that leaves us, because we have these 8-inch rafters with space above them, that leaves us space where we can run conduits and, you know, get our electrical stuff. And then we can spray foam with open cell foam, which is the easy to shave off stuff, and basically just shave that off with the underside of the rafter. So we get a whole bunch of insulation, but we've definitely controlled the condensation at the top first. And then we get our historically accurate plaster ceilings back up, and we are golden. Right, guys? Here's the roof going in. You can see that's the polyiso on top of the old. The new roofing materials is blinding white. There's Samantha being blinded with Doug and Scott from ProTop, great roofer. And this is out, yeah, on the roof deck, the second floor. That's roof. All right, let's talk mechanical systems. Mark, do you want to just kind of describe? Well, you haven't really seen everything here, so I just want to tell you. Sorry, guys, I got a preview, Mark. We're coordinating here. I showed up late. Sorry. We have a first floor plan to show kind of what comes up from the basement, and we have a second floor plan to show how we're ducting up there. So I can forward to those as we go, but generally we're looking at a ground source system. So would you like to kind of describe that, Mark?
Sure. So one of the things we want to do is keep the radiators live and active, so that we keep the radiators live and active so that we can keep the exterior wall warm and keep the way that the house was heated before kind of the same. It's an experience. Radiant heat is an experience. But geothermal or ground source heat pumps don't do a real good job of producing hot water with the conventional equipment. And so we have a two-tier system. We use a standard water-to-water unit to produce roughly, it's capable of producing 120 degrees for mild weather, which is fine. And then when we need warmer weather, we use an R134 unit, which will give me 160 degree water, 160. So we're going to circulate that on a temperature reset schedule to produce the hot water for the radiators. And we also ultimately will have a few areas with radiant floor, which we'll use the lower temperature water to support. We cascade those units so that we can optimize the efficiency point on each of them. The leaving water temperature, the standard unit, and the entering water temperature on the high temp unit, so that we'll optimize their efficiency points instead of trying to produce something that lowers their efficiency. We're also then we want to have air conditioning, so we're using water in the basement area. We're using water to air package units. We're using the Climate Master Trilogy series, which is their highest efficiency unit, and it comes with a smart water heater, so a smart tank water heater, so we can get full hot water, domestic hot water as needed. We have two of those units in the basement, one serving a back addition that's a ducted system, and one serving the main historic house. For the second floor, we didn't want to bring the geo water up there, and we really didn't have space for that size equipment. So we were using a split geo unit with the geo or the water connected unit in the basement, and a line set up to the second floor air handler that services the majority of the second floor. The two end rooms on the north and the south, there was no easy way to get ductwork to them, so we have zones off of the first floor unit that come up on either end in some niches that are so they'll be concealed, and then will blow out into the rooms from the north and the south. We also have an energy recovery ventilator serving each floor, so we'll use it for our general and our bathroom exhaust, continuous exhaust, and we'll bring in fresh air into the returns on the air handler on the second floor and into the air handlers in the basement for the first floor areas. Is that good, Tom?
Yeah. Oh, it's fantastic. Yeah, thanks. And I wanted to underline something that you said there, which is pointing back to what I was kind of alluding to earlier. This book by Rainer Banham called The Architecture of the Well-Tempered Environment is really fascinating he just looks at how architects in the early part of the 20th century especially started thinking about mechanical systems in buildings, as you know, like when Carrier came along and invented air conditioning, and how did Frank Lloyd Wright put in radiant heat, and he really does give Wright a lot of props that he really embraced it and thought about integrating mechanical systems into the architecture. And so, like, the radiator here is part of that. It's really part of the architecture. So when we were meeting with Mark and Samantha and talking about how are we going to use geo, do we just turn it all over to air? Because we know we need an air system to do ventilation and cooling. So Mark was like, yeah, but you want to keep those radiators and keep the experience of the house. And so what's really fascinating about this system using the geo is that we can use the radiators, but we can supplement it with the air. So we don't need to rely 100% on the radiators, because radiators can be a little finicky to really keep an even temperature. And so it's this hybrid system that I'm really excited to see it kind of getting up and running. So anyway, it's just that old and new coming together in this retrofit that I think is really exciting.
Tom, one last thing I forgot to mention. We do have a loop field that's installed in the front yard of the house. That was installed last year, prior to some landscaping efforts that were done. So we have a loop field installed in the front yard. Yeah, that's the mess. But yeah, that will be more than adequate to provide the geo at a very efficient level.
Yeah. And so on this second floor plan, what you're seeing there on the far left and right are basically ducts coming up from the basement unit to feed the outside bedrooms. And then we have just a small amount of softened area in the master, or the primary bedroom vestibule, kind of there in the middle of the house, with a little vertical air handler stood up in a closet. So it's pretty stealthy how this is all worked in. And this is replacing a space pack system, which you can see in this photo here, that they had installed, free of insulation pretty much in the previous house. So now that was trying to do some cooling with the high velocity system, but we're kind of changing the way that works. So to wrap this up here, what we do in our energy modeling is use the tools that we have. Basically, we get an energy diet for the building, annual energy diet. And then we look at the NREL website called PV Watts to plug in the size of a system or figure out how many panels we would need at whatever slope to get the amount of output that we need to get to net zero. So now that's not as accurate as the solar vendors. They have better shading modeling and I think more accurate tools. And more experience with that, I think. So, this is the image here on the lower right is from a solar vendor looking at the shading effects on some of these. And so we're coming up with similar numbers, and we're very, very, very close to net zero. Ultimately, this will require kind of monitoring and maybe overshooting a little bit with the solar array. We want to be careful about that. We don't want to overshoot too much, or we can jeopardize the renewable energy credits. Final thing I just want to say here is putting retrofits in perspective with regard to embodied energy, which is the energy that's contained in like making a material. If you're going to make, a yard of concrete, how much energy does it take to fire the lime to create cement and to mine the aggregate and to bring the water to the site, et cetera. And that's concrete is a notoriously high one, a high embodied energy. So we're trying to use as best we can the tools that are available to assess, and people are getting a lot better at this. And I'm not going to say that my numbers here are like spot on accurate, but I just want to. There's an order of magnitude about the way this works that you'll get the point here in a second when I walk through it, because this is kind of our energy model of how much it would be if the next 30 years we just kept the house the way it is, right? We go from the embodied energy of like 4 million or so kiloBTUs per square foot up to, 14. Okay, so what if we just do kind of low-hanging fruit? We do easy stuff. We maybe do a little bit of retrofit insulation. We don't maybe deal with the entirety of the roof because that's kind of big and expensive. We don't pull out the slab. We take care of sort of the easier stuff. Well, we can make a sizable dent. I mean, if that's all you can do, you should still do it. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And it takes very small amount of energy, embodied energy, to do that work, especially if you're using cellulose, for instance, which is a carbon negative material. But then some people might say, oh, you should just tear it down and build a new net zero house, right? Well, these lines here, the kind of gray line is like if it's a passive house, but not quite net zero, and the yellow one's like if it's net zero. And you're talking about using a whole bunch of energy to build the new building and throwing away all the energy embodied in the old building. And you're looking at a 10 to 12 year energy recapture. Now, if everybody did that right now, we'd use a tremendous amount of energy and we'd create a climate crisis worse than we have. So we can't do that. What happens if you just retrofit the net zero? You flatten the line using a very small amount of embodied energy. Now, this is where I'm saying my numbers here might be off a little bit, but it's not, the order of magnitude is what I want you to look at here. We can basically kind of stop the consumption of energy at the building with a small amount of energy versus like tearing it down and building a new one. So that's really the mindset. And we want to take this and we want to scale it up. Even if it's not net zero, even if it's really good, and we figure out a kind of an equitable energy diet, like a 3,400 kilowatt hours per person per year, for instance, which is kind of a passive house target. We'll be talking about that on my house in a month. So anyway, that's what we got. Oh wait, my phasing. What? This is the wrong. I did a save as. Okay.
Well, we can talk through it, I guess, really a bit. So it's a it started off as like a 6-year plan. We are doing 2 projects this year, which were meant for consecutive years in the HVAC build out and the roof redo. So in doing so, we've effectively chopped a year off of the length that Samantha has to deal with people trouncing through her house every day. But last year being the geothermal wells and the storm windows, this year being the roof and mechanical. Next year will likely be the basement insulation and or solar, sort of depending on pricing, and taking advantage of still high solar credits. And then we also are planning to do some interior remodel, turning a bathroom into a new restroom, a new bathroom on the, or bedroom into a new bathroom on the 2nd floor, and insulating the wall and doing the stucco work, as Tom mentioned. So the last sort of 3 years worth of work are still to be debated. We typically meet at the end of the year to try to determine and finalize projects for the upcoming year. So will be a battle between wall insulation and solar, and then basement insulation for this next year, I think.
So I'm going to stop the share, and we can get the panelists back up here and start taking questions. How about?
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for sharing all of that. It was an awesome presentation, and also just really exciting to hear from all of you guys, the whole project team, and we have the homeowner as well. So thank you all. We got a lot of good questions in, but feel free to keep typing in your questions throughout the Q&A. But first, my first question is, how has COVID changed your approach to prioritizing green building projects, especially at home or within the home?
Samantha, do you want to take that, or is that an architect question? What do you think, or Mark?
Kind of seems like an architect question to me.
Well, I did kind of really start thinking about that. I wrote a blog post about it, in fact, because I just found that people were really thinking a lot more about the environments that they're spending their days in once they were working and living at home. I think that people started thinking about indoor air quality more, and like, gosh, I'm cooking with gas and I'm reading all these reports about how poisonous that is. Maybe I should rethink that. And also just, you know, if I'm spending all my time in this environment, is it good enough? Is it supporting me? Is it making me feel alive, or am I feeling trapped in this place? You know, so there were a lot of interesting things from the very functional as well, just to you know, I need to have a place where I can work, and the kids aren't going to be, you know, bouncing off the walls right where I'm trying to have my professional meeting or whatever. So yeah, but I think that from the kind of the health standpoint, people were thinking about their indoor air, and we heard from a lot of people wanting to do some major retrofits.
Awesome. Next question that came in was asking about kind of how long the home will last, or how long these retrofits will last. And so we're wondering, how do you expect these upgrades to improve the resiliency of the house, and how long do you think until there will need to be some further renovations made?
Doug, do you want to take that? I mean, you see the life cycle of these buildings, because you work on these 100-plus-year-old buildings all the time.
In my experience, future-proofing is nearly impossible, but doesn't mean we shouldn't have goals and attempt. You know, I mean, some things are better than others, but this is why in preservation we try to make things reversible. You know, the perfect structure has not been built yet, I think. And so with that in mind, we want to do things that preserve the good historic parts, the parts that you feel, the parts that make this a Frank Lloyd Wright house, and make it the wonderful living sculpture that it is. So we struggled mightily with what do we do with the ceilings. And as Tom talked about, we looked at the ceilings as something kind of precious, because they had sand finish on them, and they had you know, this wonderful color and texture. Ultimately, we decided that the insulation would need to be very long lasting. And in order to do that, we really needed to remove the ceilings. Good justification is that the ceilings were in bad shape. But ultimately, once we started to really dig into it, we found that by removing the ceilings, we would be able to then analyze the color, the texture, the aggregates that were incorporated into it. We would be able to put in the closed cell foam completely, permanently, so that we get the best effect. But then, because we've removed the ceiling, we will be able to replicate that color and texture. And what you don't know from those photographs is that when you look at the house from inside on the second floor, and you look at the ceiling, now the ceilings are just painted with many layers of paint. But when the house is restored and upgraded, you will look across the ceiling and you'll see this wonderful sand finish texture that's a golden color on all of the second floor ceilings. And it appears as though that ceiling just continues right on out over the eave. And it projects, you know, typical Wright house. In some places it projects 6 or 8 feet out there. So the roof, which looks sort of like a flat board on top of a stack of pancakes of architecture, now this protective roof and ceiling continues right on out and then reflects light from the ground up into the house. So maybe what we're doing won't last forever, but it will be a great representation of what we believe Wright intended. And we're seizing the opportunity to capture that flavor of architecture in the restoration, but also upgrading the mechanicals and the insulation so that it will last a very long time.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Life cycles have a lot to do with the equipment, right? Like, you know, the windows on the Balch House have lasted 110 years. And we don't know how much longer they'll last. We keep repairing them, and it's old growth wood, and so that'll be great. The interior storms, well, they're not getting affected by much. They'll probably last 100 years. The geosystem, well, the well field, I assume, will last for a century. The equipment, 25 years. So everything has its own life cycle. And we just want to make sure that what we're doing on the thermal envelope is permanent and will last the life of the building, let's say. I mean, we don't have to get up there and refoam that roof. But, you know, will it maybe crack over time to the point where we have to? Maybe, but I'm hoping that's at least 50 years, you know? So anyway, some things we know the life cycle of, some things we don't.
Okay. Great, thanks guys. The next question I have is directed towards Samantha, but anyone else can hop in. Will you realize any energy cost savings from these retrofits, or was your motivation more behind increasing comfort and helping the planet and things like that?
So realistically, the energy savings that I get are not going to cover the cost of the project, but I think that has a lot to do with the fact that I'm doing it on a historic home that has historic restrictions, and I'm trying very hard to respect also what we all as a team agree that Frank Lloyd Wright may have considered to be the appropriate decisions, which obviously means that they cost more. So for example, putting back the ceilings with the original finish, that by itself is an enormous cost. And that's something I'm taking on because it is a historic home and does not apply to the project as as in the energy savings aspect of it. Then my motivations for doing the project in the first place, obviously it's a passion project. It is something that I am personally interested in because I feel like we don't have, we're being forced to think of other energy sources because our old energy sources are tapping out, and because they're also very challenging to the planet to continue to use them the way that we do. So since I am in a privileged position to do this, I feel like it's a great opportunity to show other people like me who have the ability to do renovations on their historic homes, whether historically significant or not, to be able to basically say, wow, I can improve the quality of my life by choosing to go with alternative energy sources, as opposed to just because we're not used to them and because we don't talk about them in a positive light, that therefore they're immediately dismissed as lesser. And I don't think that that's fair. And I also don't think that that makes any sense, especially for where we're headed as a planet, where we need to think about the energy sources that we use.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think it's really awesome. And I think everyone's very thankful that you're the homeowner and you are prioritizing a lot of these projects because it is a really awesome project and case study for other people to learn about. And I don't think, you know, all homeowners who would have a Frank Lloyd Wright home would be doing the same thing. So thank you, especially because you do have more kind of feedback and comments from other people than just a typical homeowner would when taking on these projects. A question that someone put in the chat that I think might be a quick question, I'm not sure. It says, why did you choose a boiler heating system over a furnace?
I'll take that, Tom. The house had a boiler system, so we were just being true to the original design. We're actually going to have, you know, so we're going back in with a water-to-water heat pump, which will provide, you know, near boiler temperature output very efficiently. When you're going all electric, there's not a lot of choices to produce hot water, you know, that are cost effective, and this is going to be one of the more cost effective methods to do that, to create that hot water that we want to use for the radiators. We are going to have a forced air system. We're not using what I would call a furnace. It's an air handler with a heat pump coil in it. So that will still have a forced air system. And one of the other questions I noted in the chat was, what are we doing for air quality and stuff like that? So we're introducing fresh air, and we're going to put in a GPS system, which is it's an air cleaning system that uses the point technology to needlepoint technology to help remove pathogens and things like that from the air. So that'll just keep the air clean and fresh smelling, and so we're doing a few things there to improve that. And the air distribution system allows us to do that in a way that we wouldn't be able to do that with a water only system. So by coupling the two together, we can introduce humidity, we can dehumidify, and we can ventilate and filtrate. So it's a kind of a nice system to have in your back pocket instead of just a water only system.
Yeah, if I could piggyback onto that, it's so funny. I know that we get into this so much and we're used to thinking about it. And I'm realizing as an outsider who hasn't been having these conversations for months and months, it might be kind of confusing, but I just want to kind of paint the picture of how the system works. There are these deep wells in the yard for the geothermal system. So that's the heat exchange. It's a ground source heat pump. And so the ground are these deep wells. And they tie into the building into a heat pump that can turn turn that water going down, you know, either warm or cool, depending on if we need heating or cooling. So as it comes into the building, it's either a water to water system, which is what Mark is talking about, where that hot water goes to boilers, or it's a water to air system where that hot water for heating season or cold water for cooling system goes to a coil that in a fan that blows through the house via ducts. So through that one well field out there in the ground, we get hot water heat through radiators, we get warm air through ducts, and we get, during the cooling season, cool air through ducts. And then on top of that, we have an energy recovery ventilator system sharing some of that ductwork to ventilate, to breathe, basically extract air from the kitchen and bathrooms and laundry and bring fresh air into the rest of the house. So it's a complex system. The engine of it really is that well field out in the ground. And we're doing that because it's the most energy efficient way to use electricity to heat and cool a building. Hope that helps.
Definitely, thank you. And yeah, thank you for clarifying too, because yeah, you guys have all been talking about this for so long and stuff like that. So I think it's nice to yeah, for a second to take your mind away from that and focus on, you know, what some of the attendees might be thinking. So thank you. One question that came into the chat is, what is the toughest historic restriction the team had to work around?
I can probably answer that, or at least I think I can. I think it's the solar panels, because we have to not be able to see them from the street. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if everybody else agrees.
Well, I think so far I mean, I agree with that one on Project Total, but every little step we've done, some bits of feedback, whether it's the windows, redoing the roof, you know, there's a special Greek key that runs around the eaves. You know, we're constantly bombarded with questions of, are you keeping it? If you are, how are you doing it? Are you changing it? You know, all these things. And, you know, we're getting very acquainted with Oak Park's Historic Preservation Commission every year, going in and telling them what we're planning to do the upcoming year. So, yeah, we're constantly running into obstacles. They're not roadblocks. None of them are impossible to figure out, but you know, just take a little more thought.
I would like to jump in here on that, actually. The main resistance or obstacle that the main question we've had to answer with any of the systems is, what are you ripping out and throwing in the dumpster? And the fact of the matter is, we're ripping out and throwing in the dumpster very, very little. The second floor ceiling, yes. The second floor ceiling was toast to begin with. It took me a little bit of kicking and screaming to get there, because I have huge respect for original fabric. But when that original fabric is covered under 20 layers of paint, never to be seen again anyway, and we can replicate it so that it's undetectable, boy, it would be pretty hard to justify not replacing that ceiling, because it gives us access to all of the mechanicals, the electric, smoke detectors, you know, insulation, taking care of the roof properly, and the structure, because Wright's original structure on that roof and ceiling, it left something to be desired. So yeah, yes, you give up a little something here and there historically, but once even very dedicated preservationists realize that we are not heaving a Frank Lloyd Wright house in the dumpster and starting over, we are in fact giving an original Frank Lloyd Wright building new legs for decades and decades to come. It's amazing, resistance to what we're doing drops away pretty quickly.
And, you know, the state thought we were crazy. Why the hell would you want to do that? That's not what this building is intended to do. And I understand and respect that, you know, that kind of opinion from, you know, from experts, but I think that it is a valid way to approach this. And we're taking a risk, and we're going to get some criticism from some people. But we're doing the right thing by the building. We're doing the right thing by the environment in our estimation, or we wouldn't be doing it. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. Another question that we had come into the chat is, if this house is all electric, what do you guys do during thunderstorms or snowstorms? If the power goes out, does the solar or ComEd charge a battery backup system?
Want me to take this?
Well, yeah, thanks. Yeah, sure.
Well, I was just going to say, the truth of the matter is, in a power backup, unless you a power loss, unless you have a battery backup or a generator, all mechanical systems go dead, because they all take some excitation energy to make them work. So you're not going to, you know, unless you have a backup. So the fact that it's all electric isn't really relevant, and unless you want to size a generator to handle it all, which we do not have a generator on this project or batteries on this project as it stands. We also have a relatively reliable grid in our area, and so that might not be the same decision you make on any other building, but on this building, you know, the resilience of the grid is relatively high, and we don't have long outages typically. We'll knock on wood for that one, Samantha. But again, her old boiler system with a pump wouldn't run in a loss of power either. So you'd still be without heat, and you wouldn't be doing this interesting project.
Yeah, and I'll just say that it's easy to retrofit a battery backup system if we want to, relatively speaking, or to add a generator. The overall resilience of a project is increased the more we make the thermal envelope more robust. And this is one of the arguments about passive house, that you have passive survivability in a long, I mean, like in a month-long power outage, your building won't freeze in the middle of winter if it's passive house. Now, we're not getting to passive house, but I'm just saying the more we do that, the less of an impact a power outage of a couple hours will be. But yeah, I think what I've heard from everybody is pretty much echoing what Mark says, which is that our grid in this area is pretty stable. So backup batteries are usually just not something you use.
Going off of that, Tom, someone did ask, they said that they know you specialize in passive house. Was there ever any discussions or even a possibility about applying that to this home?
Applied all the principles that we can, but there's absolutely no way that this building would become a passive house. It just, were there 88 windows? Is that right?
Yeah, or 92. Right?
Yeah. It's overglazed for meeting the passive. The thing about the passive house standard is that it kind of requires you to have a bit of restraint in glazing because its metrics include limitations on space heating and cooling amount of energy, your peak load, okay? Peak load drives the size of the mechanical system. And so we want to do as much of that insulation as we can to kind of reduce the size of the mechanical system, but it's not anywhere near where it would be if it were a passive house. So yeah, I mean, but the principles of airtightness and insulation and ventilation, continuity of that thermal envelope, absolutely apply those in everything. Getting the energy recovery ventilation, doing things efficiently, yeah, that's all there. But I never would have dreamt of saying, oh great, let's make it a passive house. It would have required ripping out a bunch of windows and making it a very different building.
Great. I think we have a time for a couple more questions. This one is for Samantha. Did you anticipate all of this work done to your house before owning it?
No, absolutely not. I fell in love with this home when I came to see it. I actually wasn't even planning on living in Oak Park. But when it came onto the market, I came to see it and I just fell in love with it. Then living here and seeing how much energy loss this building has and how much I spend on utilities because of that energy loss, then it started me thinking about what the possibilities were. And strangely enough, the first thing that had popped into my mind, because it has a flat roof, is that I could put solar panels on it. But because it's a historic home, you can't have solar panels inclined to be viewed from the street. So no, absolutely did not start there.
Another question that we had in the chat was, what are your expected results for net zero and how are you meeting this goal?
Well, that was kind of what the energy modeling slides were about. Without redoing the presentation, conservation first, so that's insulation and airtightness, and then efficient mechanical systems, efficient appliances and lighting, and then offsetting the energy with solar. And so if you came in late, what we started with was an energy use intensity of 96. That unit is kilobTUs per square foot on an annual basis. We're predicting now that we'll get to 1 kilobTU per square foot using 52 330 watt panels. If the wattage increases, the output of panels increases as we've been seeing, and we hope it does. Then by the time we put them on, if those are, let's say, 375 or 400 watt panels, then our EUI will be 0, and we actually will be 0 energy. So to get certified, like to follow, let's say, the Living Future Institute zero energy building zero energy building protocol, you basically have to monitor it and just show what you produced and what you used. And if it was 0 or negative, then you can be certified. And if not, well, you did a pretty darn good job, and that's better than not trying.
Awesome. Yeah, I always love that, Tom. How I think a lot of your message sometimes is to at least get as close as you can if you can't make it to net zero. And I think that's a lot with this as well, as you couldn't to passive house with this historic home, but at least, you know, still having those practices and getting as close as possible, because you don't want to deter yourself from something just because you can't, you know, make it all the way to net zero or all the way to passive house or something like that. So thank you. And I think that's all we have time for, because I have a few slides to pull up just to talk about, plug the rest of the home tour. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Tom.
There was not in the Q&A, but in the chat, there was one about this. Somebody said, is a storm window single or double pane? I just wanted to say that we did go with single pane. We looked at double glazed, but it was really heavy, wasn't it, Doug? We had problems with the hardware.
They are double. They are insulated glass.
It's just a thin cavity.
Oh yeah, that's this project. Sorry. Yeah.
Too many good projects, Tom. So
of course.
I'll be pretty quick on this one, but yes, the interior mounted in-swing storm windows are insulated glass, and they are surrounded, both the glass panel itself and the window sash where it meets the jamb on the window are surrounded by a silicone, it's a hollow silicone bulb system, which makes them pretty close to airtight. And so they are quite insulating.
They're not low E though.
No, they are not low E.
We didn't do the low E. Yeah, correct.
Because that would have changed the color of the glass, and it would have
had a pretty profound impact, I think, on the light that comes in and goes out of the house.
All right. Thanks, Ashley. I just wanted to catch that one because I thought that was a good one. Yeah.
No, of course. Thank you. No problem. And for everybody else, all the attendees who have been writing in questions, thank you so much for all the questions. I know we did not get to all of the questions, but I will be sending a follow-up email to the presenters with some of the questions that you guys asked that we didn't get to, in case, you know, it's an easy thing for them to write out and share, because we got a lot of great Q&A and I appreciate it. I said we had 30 minutes, so ask all your questions, but you know, 30 minutes does fly by. So I'm just going to pull up the last few slides just to let everyone know what's coming up. So next up, well, first of all, thank you so much to Samantha for sharing your home with us. It was really awesome to hear your story and hear more about your home and see photos. And for everybody on the call, they do have an Instagram for the home. I believe the Instagram is Balch House, @Balch House. That I think is also put in the chat. So definitely check it out if you want to see more pictures and everything. Thank you so much, Tom, Mark, and Doug, for sharing your experience on how to maintain this historic home and the integrity while creating high performance. So this was definitely a treat to have all of you guys on this home and hear more about the Frank Lloyd Wright house. So thank you, everyone. And thank you everyone for joining us today for the first 2021 Greenbelt Home Tour webinar. I hope that you guys can also join us for the second one, which will be in 2 weeks on August 11th at 4 o'clock again, which is A Tale of Two Codes, Adapting Your Approach to Net Zero New Construction. And this webinar will feature two people, a builder and an architect, who have designed net zero homes. And one is in Boulder, Colorado, and one is in Illinois, and they will discuss the different approaches and codes that led them to these homes. So check that out if you guys want to register. I'm sure the link is in the chat. Otherwise, you can go to greenbelthometour.org and register for all of the upcoming webinars. as well as the other one that Tom will be on August 25th, talking about his own home. So definitely check that out as well. And then lastly, these are some of our upcoming events for Illinois Green Alliance. Tomorrow, we have another event with the Indiana Toll Road, and this is actually approved for one LEED specific credit for BD&C and Green Associates. So if you guys are looking for more credits, definitely check that out. And it's also approved for AIA 1 LU credit. So if that applies to you and you're looking for those credits, definitely register, as well as the August 11th program that I mentioned. And lastly, the boat cruise, which will be Illinois Green Alliance's first in-person event since early 2020 or 2019, I don't even remember. So it'll be our first time seeing everyone in person. So, and it's half capacity and tickets are going fast. We have about 100 tickets left. So if you guys are interested in going, definitely purchase your ticket, and I hope to see you there. So thank you again to all of our speakers, and I will send out the slides and the recording and everything. So thank you again, and I hope everyone has a good rest of their day.